Did ancient humans have bullies? Not were ancient humans violent? Not did ancient societies have conflict? Something much more specific and much stranger. Was there 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 years ago some guy in the group who made everyone else's life worse just because he could? The evidence says yes. And the evidence also says something more interesting. The story of human bullying isn't really a story about bullies. It's a story about how our ancestors built one of the only known systems in the animal kingdom specifically designed to stop them. Let's get into it. First, a definition, because bullying gets used loosely and this deserves precision. Anthropologists and behavioral scientists studying this generally mean something specific. Repeated, one-sided exploitation of another individual or group using a power imbalance that isn't really about resources or survival, it's about establishing dominance. That distinction matters enormously. A fight over food during a famine is not bullying. A physically dominant individual repeatedly humiliating or intimidating a weaker one, for no functional reason except reinforcing the hierarchy, that's bullying. And once you define it that precisely, you can actually go looking for it in the deep past and in our closest living relatives. Start with chimpanzees because this is where the story usually starts. Chimp troops have dominance hierarchies, and those hierarchies are enforced through exactly the kind of behavior we'd call bullying in a human context. Alpha males and their coalitions intimidate lower-ranking males, sometimes systematically, sometimes violently, to maintain status. Jane Goodall's decades of observation at Gombe documented alliances of male chimps that would target and repeatedly harass specific individuals, not for food, not for mates in the moment, but seemingly to keep them in their place. If our closest primate relatives organize their social lives around dominance hierarchies enforced through targeted intimidation, the honest starting assumption is that our shared ancestor probably did too, which means bullying in some form is plausibly older than our species, older than language, older than fire. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and where the story of humans diverges sharply from the story of chimpanzees. Somewhere in our evolutionary past, something changed. Anthropologist Christopher Buam spent years studying this exact question, comparing hierarchy and dominance across surviving hunter-gatherer societies around the world, from the Kalahari to the Arctic. His conclusion, laid out in his book, Hierarchy in the Forest, was that human foragers didn't just tolerate bullies less than chimps do. They built active, coordinated systems to suppress them. Bohm called it reverse dominance hierarchy, and the idea is genuinely elegant. In most social animals, dominance flows from the strong individual down. The biggest, strongest, most aggressive member of the group asserts control, and everyone else adapts around that. Reverse dominance hierarchy flips the direction of power. Instead of one dominant individual controlling the group collectively controls anyone who tries to dominate. And the mechanisms hunter-gatherer societies developed for this are remarkably consistent across cultures that never had contact with each other. The first mechanism is gossip, and it's not trivial. In small, close-knit foraging bands, reputation is currency, and gossip is how reputation gets built or destroyed. Someone who starts throwing their weight around, hoarding meat, intimidating others, refusing to share, becomes a subject of conversation, not confrontation. Conversation. And in a group where everyone depends on everyone else for survival, a bad reputation is genuinely dangerous. It can mean exclusion from cooperative hunting, from resource sharing, eventually from the group itself. The second mechanism is ridicule, and this one is almost universal in the ethnographic record. Anthropologists working with groups like the Jew or Huansi of the Kalahari documented a practice sometimes called insulting the meat. When a successful hunter brought back a large kill, the group would deliberately mock it. Call it scrawny. Complain about the effort of carrying it. This looks bizarre from the outside, why insult your best provider? But the logic is precise. It's a preemptive strike against arrogance. A hunter who starts believing his success makes him superior to the group is a hunter who might start acting like it. Ridicule keeps that impulse from ever taking root. The message, delivered constantly and casually, is simple. You are not more important than anyone else here, no matter what you just did. The third mechanism is ostracism, which is the serious version. Persistent bullying, persistent dominance-seeking behavior that gossip and ridicule failed to correct could result in someone being excluded from the group. In an environment where survival depended on cooperation, on shared knowledge, on pooled labor, exclusion could be close to a death sentence. This wasn't a minor social consequence. It was one of the most severe punishments available, and everyone in the group knew it. And the fourth mechanism, documented across a striking range of unrelated hunter-gatherer societies, was lethal. In extreme repeated cases, groups would collectively execute a member who consistently used violence or intimidation to dominate others and refused to stop. This wasn't chaotic. It wasn't a single furious individual lashing out. Anthropological accounts describe something closer to a quiet consensus, multiple group members agreeing, sometimes acting together, to permanently remove someone whose behavior threatened the cohesion of the entire band. It sounds severe because it was. But it tells you how seriously small-scale human societies treated the threat of an unchecked dominant individual. Here's the part worth sitting with. This is a genuinely unusual thing for a social species to do. Across most of the animal kingdom, physical strength and aggression translate more or less directly into status and reproductive success. The strongest individual tends to win. Human foraging societies built, apparently independently, in unconnected populations across the globe. A set of tools specifically to prevent that outcome. Gossip, ridicule, ostracism. In extreme cases, execution. Different tools, same target. Don't let one person's strength become everyone else's problem. Why would evolution favor this? One leading explanation comes back to cooperation itself. Human survival, especially in the deep past, depended enormously on group cooperation, shared childcare, pooled food, coordinated defense, collective knowledge passed across generations. A dominant bully who intimidates and exploits the rest of the group actively damages that cooperation. He takes more than his share, he creates fear instead of trust, and he makes the group less effective as a survival unit. Groups that developed effective ways to suppress that kind of behavior would have functioned better, cooperated more effectively, and very plausibly outcompeted groups that didn't. Which means, in a very real sense, an ancient bully wasn't just a social problem. He may have been an evolutionary liability for the whole band, and the mechanisms to stop him weren't cultural decoration. They were survival infrastructure. This reframes something we usually think about backward. We tend to assume that as humans became more organized, more civilized, we developed rules against bullying as a kind of moral progress. A later refinement layered on top of a more brutal past. The anthropological evidence suggests almost the opposite sequence. Some of our most basic social instincts, the discomfort with watching someone dominate a group, the impulse to gossip about someone who's getting too full of themselves, the social pressure to stay humble even after real success. These may be genuinely ancient tools, older than agriculture, older than writing, possibly older than our species, shaped by tens of thousands of years of small groups actively working to keep dominant individuals in check. And it raises an uncomfortable modern question, because most of these mechanisms depended on something that's largely gone now. They worked because everyone knew everyone. Reputation meant something specific and durable because you couldn't escape the group whose opinion you damaged. Ridicule worked because there was no anonymity to hide behind. Ostracism was severe because there wasn't another town over the hill to just move to instead. Strip away small, tightly interdependent groups, and you strip away the entire enforcement system our species apparently spent tens of thousands of years building. So did ancient humans have bullies? Almost certainly yes, going back to a shared ancestor with chimpanzees. Going back further than we have any direct evidence for. But the more interesting discovery isn't that bullies existed. It's that our ancestors didn't just accept that as the price of living in groups. They organized against it deliberately, collectively, using nothing but words, laughter, exclusion, and, in the most extreme cases, force, to build something close to a check on power itself. Tens of thousands of years before anyone wrote the word justice down. If you had to guess, which of these four tools, gossip, ridicule, ostracism, or something more severe, do you think would work best on someone today? Tell me in the comments. And if you want the next one in this series on how ancient humans handled leadership and who actually got to be in charge, subscribe because that one's coming next.